Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing something a bit different because this month, as I record this, August 2022 is the 40th anniversary of the manufacture of the first compact disc. So I thought, how can I roll that into the channel? And then it hit me. I'm going to do a little bit of a show and tell of movie related CDs that I've got. Some of them are soundtracks, some of them aren't quite soundtracks. All of them are CDs, and I like CDs. I like being able to just kind of stick something into the machine and have the music play. Now, that isn't to say subscription services for music don't have their virtues, and you can always use your Alexa or your Google Home thing to give you the music right on the spot, so there's no actual physical manifestation of the music. But subscription services are also got their downsides, and they're kind of like drug dealers, really. If you stop paying for them, your supply gets cut off. Everything you ever paid for on a subscription service disappears the moment you stop paying for it. Whereas if you buy physical media, you've got it. I'm grabbing these discs at random and I'm going to talk about them, and I'm going to drop them on the floor, and then I'm going to put them back on the shelves later. Grab a pen and paper, because there may be a few soundtracks or a few movie related discs here that you want to check out. So let's start with classic film from the 1950s. It's got a soundtrack that includes Little Richard, Julie London, Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, the Platters and Fats Domino. And it is Frank Tashlin's The Girl Can't Help It. Now, if you haven't seen The Girl Can't Help It, you should see that movie. It is mad 1950s stuff. It's got Tom Ewell and Jane Mansfield in it. It's got some interesting visuals, and if you haven't seen the movie, you can still like the soundtrack because it's all hits from other people. There's Gene Vincent singing Bebop-A-Lula, Julie London doing Cry Me a River. You Can't Help It sung by Little Richard. So yeah, 1950s, interesting for the sexual politics as much as anything else. So let's drop that one on the floor. This one's one you wouldn't really expect. All of the soundtracks for the three movies in this trilogy are solid, and they've got some really interesting stuff on them. This one happens to be the Ocean's 12 soundtrack from the Steven Soderbergh Ocean's trilogy. And they've got really interesting music in it, kind of deep cut, earlier decade European songs in some cases, as well as some modern music as well. But they're really weird to listen to. You can listen through the soundtrack of something like this and go, hey, that's kind of interesting, I wonder what that is. They've got things like Roland Vincent's LSD Party from Vampiros Lesbos on it. And they've got music from Italian movie composers I really like Piero Umiliani. Really nice soundtrack, and not one you'd think of when you think of interesting film soundtracks. But Ocean's 12, definitely a soundtrack you should check out. This is one you're probably not going to expect me to have done, but I like it. It's kind of weird, and I like it pretty much for one track. Beavers and Butthead Do America. Now, the reason I like this is it's got one of the most gonzo tracks of any soundtrack in history. It's got Engelbert Humperdinck singing a song called, you ready for it? Lesbian Seagull. It is totally weird, this one. It's got a bit of Isaac Hayes in there as well, because Isaac Hayes sang the theme song to Beavers and Butthead Do America. So there is that. There's a bit of White Zombie in there as well, Ozzy Osbourne, all the things you'd expect. But then you get Engelbert Humperdinck singing a song about a lesbian seagull. That is a weird soundtrack in so many ways, but I kind of like it as well. I've got two of the three discs of this one, and it's a compilation of soundtracks from a particular movie studio. I don't have the third one, and I should look around for it. But this one has a whole bunch of Italian movie soundtracks from the 60s and 70s in an interesting compilation. And it's called Beat at Cinecittà. There's two volumes of it. There's volume 1. There's volume 2. And it's got some really weird soundtracks from Italian popular and spy movies, amongst other things. Lots of people like Piero Piccioni and Nino Fidenco. Bruno Nicolai's in there as well. Nora Ortolani. Really well packaged selection. And the back cover is not bad either. The original Beat at Cinecittà Volume 1 has this beautiful interior thing with a whole bunch of extras in there. about the different tracks. But these ones, if you're into that kind of groovy, loungy 1960s Italian soundtracks, the Beat at Cinecittà discs should be in your collection. They're quite fun, and I like them a lot because I like that style and that era of Italian movie soundtracks. While we're on the subject, I picked this one up because I love the movie. I saw the movie, it had been recommended to me, and I saw the movie, and so I thought I'd get the soundtrack. It is the soundtrack to Dino Risi's Il Sorpasso, and the music's by Riz Ortolani, and there's the soundtrack. Really fine soundtrack, this one. It's got a whole bunch of the diegetic music in there and a few other tracks as well. It's also got some bonuses. There's the soundtrack of Divorce Italian Style, and the soundtrack to a Vittorio De Sica movie as well. Another one called Le Pigeon. And yeah, they're really interesting early 1960s Italian soundtracks. Groovy music for people who like that style of music, which I do. And it's also got that car horn sound that people who've seen Il Sorpasso remember from Vittorio Gassman's character's car. There's a particular car horn he's got, and that car horn is on the soundtrack as well. Really great. It's a really great Italian soundtrack of the time. So let's move over to Germany, and this one I like a lot. It's by Peter Thomas, who did a lot of soundtracks in Germany in the 60s and 70s, including the soundtrack to Raum Patrol Orion, the German Star Trek-y space opera TV series of the 1960s. But this is the Peter Thomas soundtrack to a series of FBI movies made in Germany, starring George Nader, the Jerry Cotton series. And this double CD set is called 100% Cotton. And there is George Nader on the front and on the back. The Jerry Cotton movies you've got to see. I really should do a video about them and kind of deep dive into them because they're real fun. They're kind of FBI movies, supposedly set in America but filmed in Germany, with mostly German and other European actors. It's that really cross-cultural thing that they had in the 60s, kind of like the Krimi films in Germany, were Edgar Wallace films set in England but filmed in Germany. And this is the same kind of thing. Very groovy soundtracks to all of them by Peter Thomas. You also get a really great little booklet with a whole bunch of stills and a whole bunch of information about the 5 or 6 movies that George Nader did playing the FBI character Jerry Cotton. I know there was a parody film made a couple of years ago, which I haven't seen yet. But this one, really interesting soundtracks. Somewhat different than anything else you're going to hear from anywhere else in the world. This is the only MCU soundtrack I've got. Black Panther, the album, from the movie Black Panther, starring, of course, Chadwick Boseman. I just like the sounds of this. I like the music. It's got Kendrick Lamar in it. It's hard to read the back cover of this. Georgia Smith and a lot of Kendrick Lamar. But yeah, that's a really interesting soundtrack, and it's a good one to have on in the background while you're doing other things. And if you're into the MCU, this is probably the most out there of the MCU soundtracks, if with the possible exception of the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtracks. Really interesting stuff, and I do have the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtracks, come to think of it. So it's not the only MCU soundtrack I've got, but this one I find the most interesting. Going back to Europe for a little bit, this one is really great. 1970s Italian crime movies. I've mentioned the Italian connection with Mario Adolf, and yes, I know Mario Adolf is German now. This is a whole bunch of Italian crime movie soundtracks from the 1970s, and it's called Beretta 70. Now, the soundtracks are really great. It's got Goblin, which of course is Dario Argento's band. It's got some stuff by Adriano Fabi. Let's see, Stelvio Cipriani, which is a really interesting soundtrack as well. But again, like some of the other ones, it's got a whole bunch of information in a booklet telling you about the movies and about the soundtracks themselves. So you can learn a whole bunch about various Italian crime movies from the 1970s that you haven't seen. And the Italian crime movies in the 70s are crazy action flicks. Dangerous as hell to film all the stunts, but they really do have a gritty kind of granular street levelness about them that I like, and I like this soundtrack as well. This one's kind of a hippie nostalgia comedy action film from, I think, the 1980s and 1990s. It's a movie called Flashback with Dennis Hopper and Kiefer Sutherland in it, with Dennis Hopper playing an old radical who escapes from prison and Kiefer Sutherland playing an FBI agent who's tight-assed. And the soundtrack's pretty good as well. It's got the Ultraviolence in the Flesh for Lulu, Edie Bricknell, R.E.M., Bob Dylan, Canned Heat, Steppenwolf, Jefferson Airplane. And of course it has the one thing that all of these movies have to have, Jimi Hendrix All Along the Watchtower. So it's a good little solid album of a combination of contemporary music from the era in which the movie was made and 1960s hits with the Steppenwolf Born to Be Wild, of course, Coming Back to Me by Jefferson Airplane, which is used really well in the film. And People Get Ready, Bob Dylan. It's got a nice vibe about it, and this one's kind of a forgotten movie in Dennis Hopper's career. I liked it. I like what it had to say, but it's definitely not one of the best pictures Hopper ever made. Now, I know science fiction rates really well on this channel, so this 4 CD set I picked up is definitely going to be one you want to have. Science fiction and horror, a 4 CD set. Dig this. This is the movies it has a soundtrack for. The Day the Earth Stood Still. There's a whole bunch of tracks for that. Forbidden Planet. The Mummy from 1959. Psycho. The Monster That Challenged the World. And Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. So there is a whole bunch of... There's 4 CDs worth of full soundtracks for all of those films. So if you want to hear the kind of electronic tonalities that BB and Lewis Barron did for Forbidden Planet, you can pick it up on this and get a whole bunch more as well. It's a really interesting compilation. It came out of England by Real Gone Music Company. And if you're into these soundtracks and into these movies, the soundtracks are really worth having. I'm a really big fan of the music of Stephen Sondheim. So I've got a couple of Sondheim movie soundtracks here. West Side Story. And now I've said previously on the channel that I only like 2 tracks from this, which is Cool and the Jets song. But the others are pretty good. America's got a few other ones as well. But I thought I ought to have that. Of course, Natalie Wood and half the other actors aren't singing with their own voices. But West Side Story is a solid soundtrack. Haven't heard the soundtrack from the new one yet. Haven't seen the new Steven Spielberg version of West Side Story yet. Not really looking forward to it either. I think that the best way to tell this story of West Side Story is if they got rid of all the music and set it in Renaissance Italy. That would be a really great movie. But West Side Story I've got because I'm a big Sondheim fan. This other one, they did a movie version of this musical. I've got this Broadway soundtrack of it. But in the 1960s, they did a Stephen Sondheim musical where they took out most of the songs, which seemed ill-considered to me. But they did it nonetheless. And the movie did okay. It was directed by Richard Lester. It had Phil Silvers and Zero Mostel and Jack Gilford and a bunch of other people in it. But I went back to the original because there are some songs that aren't in the movie because of that stupid decision not to put most of the songs in. But are definitely in the soundtrack. And it's a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. There are some great songs in this soundtrack which you should check out. It's joyous, it's fun, it's silly, it's got some incredible rhymes and wordplay in it that Sondheim was famous for. But the idea of adapting a stage play which was innately a musical and then taking all of the music out of it, maybe one of the more stupid movie decisions made in the 1960s, a decade replete with bad movie making decisions. But the soundtrack of the original Broadway version with Zero Mostel is joyous fun for me. Now this one, there is a movie soundtrack to it. I've got the movie soundtrack on vinyl. The movie was made in the 1960s. In fact, it was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. But I went back and got the original Broadway soundtrack because I liked it better. Now the movie, let me know if you want me to review this movie for the channel because it's weird. The movie's got Fred Astaire and Petula Clark in it. and oddly enough Tommy Steele. But the original stage version of Finian's Rainbow is a much superior adaptation of the original intellectual property. It's about leprechauns, and it's about magic, and it's about race relations in the South. It's about all sorts of things. It's a really weird musical. But I thought I'd get the original version of this. Even though the movie soundtrack, there's nothing wrong with it. And it's one of 2 musicals that Francis Ford Coppola made. And I'll leave it as an exercise for you to figure out what the other one was. It's a really odd little musical made into a singularly odd, big budget Hollywood film in about 1969-1970 by Francis Ford Coppola, which did really shit business. Moving right along, got to have some blaxploitation music in this stuff because, as you know, I am a big blaxploitation fan. And this is a good compilation of blaxploitation soundtrack called Bad Mothers. Now, what you've got in here is Marvin Gaye doing Trouble Man, Isaac Hayes' theme from Shaft, you had to have that in there. The Four Tops, Are You Man Enough from Shaft in Africa, which is the best bit of Shaft in Africa in some ways. We got Earth, Wind and Fire doing Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song theme. Let's see, Willie Hutch's theme from Foxy Brown. Curtis Mayfield's Superfly, which is just the best of the best. Some stuff from Cleopatra Jones and the Mac, and James Brown's theme for Slaughter. I talked about Slaughter a couple of videos ago. Time Is Tight by Booker T and the MGs from a movie called Uptight, which is really good. Pusher Man by Curtis Mayfield, which is the best track on the Superfly soundtrack. Not one for white people to do in karaoke. And theme from Truck Turner by Isaac Hayes. And the theme from Savage by Don Julian. Really deep cuts, some of these. But a great compilation of blaxploitation soundtracks. This one you can pick up on Disney Plus. I think it's on Star, which is attached to Disney Plus. A movie from 1999 with Oliver Platt and Stanley Tucci, directed by Stanley Tucci. It's The Imposters. Now, this movie is great because it's Stanley Tucci and Oliver Platt doing a screwball 1930s comedy in 1999. Really great cast. Richard Jenkins is in it. Who else is in there? Alison Janney's in it as well. Billy Connolly. And this one I got for one specific reason. It's got Steve Buscemi singing The Nearness of You in it. In an amusing way. There's a whole bunch of other music from the time. Some of it, they've got like classic cuts by Sidney Bechet and other jazz musicians. A really nice little soundtrack and a hidden gem of a comedy film. It's not for everybody, but I like it a lot. And again, another compilation of soundtracks from the 1960s. This one's called The Mad Mad World of Soundtracks, which has got stuff from, it's got Henry Mancini's The Party from The Party. It's got Sid Rahman's theme from Stiletto. Let's see, Boyce and Bobby Hart doing the theme from The Ambushes, the Matt Helm, Dean Martin movie. And Margaret singing The Swinger from the movie of the same name. It's got a bit of Hugo Montenegro in there as well. Nancy Sinatra, The Walker Brothers. Paul Desmond. It's even got a Peter Thomas track. The Sandpipers, Harper's Bazaar, and Nielsen. Really interesting deep cut set of soundtracks. Some weird and wonderful things in there. And I recommend that one as well. Now the last one, the last 2 CDs I've got for you are part of a wonderful genre I like, which is non-singing actors singing. The first one isn't really a guy singing, it's a guy reciting things. Kind of a little bit like Rex Harrison did in My Fair Lady. But this one is Lyrics for Lovers with Dirk Bogarde, basically reciting the lyrics to songs with a musical background. Now what's he do? A foggy day in London town? The way you look tonight? You go to my head? Smoke gets in your eyes? I get along without you very well. As time goes by. If you ever want to hear Dirk Bogarde recite As Time Goes By, this is the CD for you. It is mad. And I like it a lot. The other one is a kind of deep cut 1950s actor singing. Singing songs like A Lovely Way to Spend an Evening, The More I See You, I'll String Along With You, I Wished on the Moon, which is one of my favourite tracks on this one. But it's Jeff Chandler Sings For You. Now, Jeff Chandler was an actor from the 1950s, a kind of bare-chested action film star actor. Did some really interesting films like Attack and Yankee Pasha and Yankee Buccaneer and a few other films like that. But this is Jeff Chandler doing an album of songs. And his singing voice is kind of interesting. Not interesting in an Enrique Caruso's Frank Sinatra kind of way, but interesting in a what the kind of way. And I kind of like the fact that he did an album. There are any number of actors, particularly some actresses, but mostly actors, who made albums and didn't necessarily have a singing voice, but could put a song across using their acting skills. And Jeff Chandler was one of those. So his album is another recommend from me. So, happy birthday to CDs. The first CD released, by the way, the first commercial CD released was released in September 1982. And unfortunately, it was an ABBA album. But since then, it does seem to have diversified. And CDs are still going strong. If I go down to my local JB Hi-Fi, there are a couple of rows of CDs still, so the format hasn't died yet and hasn't been replaced again by vinyl, and it hasn't been replaced by non-physical media and streaming and subscription services. So I've got a fondness for CDs. I don't remember what the first CD I bought was. I remember what the first album I bought was. I remember what the first Blu-ray I bought was. I even remember what the first VHS tape I bought was, but I don't remember what the first CD was. Nonetheless, I like the format. I like the fact that it was easy to manufacture in most places, so you get CDs from a whole bunch of different cultures. And as I think Cory Doctorow said, media doesn't die. Media just changes its position in the hierarchy of media. So there are still people who are doing cassettes, for instance, and there are still people manufacturing and playing 8-track tapes. So media just changes position as new media comes along. I don't know what's going to replace streaming services and digital downloads. Who knows? The future is a tabula rasa. We haven't written it yet. But I like CDs, and happy birthday to CDs. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. You can also support the channel by going to patreon.com/paleocinema and donating there. Got some more movies coming up soon that are really interesting. Umbrella has sent me some more stuff. I've got a couple of other things I want to talk about. And yeah, some of them are weird and some of them are wonderful. And some of them are both weird and wonderful. So anyway, in the meantime, look after yourselves. Watch some good movies. Watch some bad movies. Play a few CD soundtracks and just enjoy yourself. And I'll catch you next time.